While a wealthy businessman was making his usual visit to his father's grave, an unexpected encounter with a young girl begging for alms changed everything. The act of kindness he offered set off a chain of events that would unveil a deeply buried secret. What started as an act of compassion soon transformed into a journey of discoveries and surprises that challenged everything he thought he knew about his own past. Stay tuned until the end to unravel the mystery and understand the impact of this unexpected encounter. If you haven't subscribed yet, take the opportunity to do so now and never miss an emotional story like this. The visit to the grave. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Fernando Almeida drove his elegant imported car through the silent streets of the city, heading toward the cemetery where his father was buried. The sun was low on the horizon, casting a soft golden light over the world, creating an atmosphere of calm and reflection. Fernando was a successful man, known for his wealth and influence, but in those moments he was far from the spotlight in business meetings. He was searching for something deeper, something he only found in the serene space of the cemetery. As he parked the car, Fernando took a deep breath and observed the place. The cemetery was a garden of memories, with towering trees and well-maintained stone pathways. The old tombstones, covered with moss and flowers, seemed to whisper stories of lives gone by. Each step Fernando took echoed softly, as if the very ground was honoring his visit. He approached his father's grave, a white marble monument with elegant inscriptions. The name Antonio Almeida was carefully engraved, along with dates marking the beginning and end of a well-lived life. Fernando knelt beside the grave, his father's memory coming to mind with the clarity of a dream. The feeling of loss and gratitude mingled, making the visit a ritual of introspection and longing. As he touched the cold surface of the tombstone, Fernando recalled the lessons his father had taught him. Antonio Almeida had been a man of principles, whose life was marked by hard work and a deep sense of integrity. Fernando remembered the stories told at night, the wise advice, and the hands that, though aged and calloused, never stopped building and creating. Fernando closed his eyes and imagined his father's face, so expressive and full of life. He recalled the conversations where his father taught him about the importance of staying true to one's values, treating people with dignity, and never forgetting where one came from, no matter how high they rose in life. These memories were like a balm for his soul, offering comfort and clarity in moments of doubt. In the cemetery, time seemed to slow down, allowing Fernando to dive into his reflections. He thought about how success and wealth, which often seemed to be the ultimate goal in life, were actually just a part of the legacy his father had left behind. The true legacy was love, wisdom, and character, which had shaped Fernando into who he was. Each visit to the grave was an opportunity to reevaluate and reaffirm those values. With one last glance at the grave, Fernando stood up and said a brief prayer, thanking the father who had always guided him, even after his departure. He left the cemetery with a sense of peace and renewed determination. Though his father was no longer physically present, his influence lived on in every decision Fernando made and every value he carried with him. This visit to the grave wasn't just a moment of remembrance, but a celebration of life and the teachings that span generations. Fernando knew that the true wealth lay in honoring his father's legacy and living a life that reflected the principles he had learned. And so he left the cemetery, ready to face the world with the same generous heart and determination that his father had demonstrated. The encounter with the girl. After his visit to the grave, Fernando walked slowly down the cemetery's stone path, still immersed in his thoughts. The crisp morning air and the silence around him created an atmosphere of peace, but something made him stop. In the distance he saw a small figure, a girl, sitting next to one of the graves. Her body was hunched over, her shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world rested on them. She wore simple clothes, worn out from time and use, barely protecting her from the cold of the morning. Fernando, used to seeing all kinds of things in his life as a businessman, was immediately intrigued. There was something about that scene that moved him. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 10 years old, held a small can in her hands and gently shook it, begging for alms from passers-by. The contrast between her youth and the somber cemetery setting was heartbreaking. He paused for a moment, watching from afar. The girl's face was delicate, but her eyes carried a sadness that seemed too heavy for someone so young. Her hair was a bit disheveled, and the dirt on her cheeks showed that life hadn't been easy for her. Fernando couldn't just walk away. Something about the scene brought him back to reality. reminding him that not everyone had the same privileges he had enjoyed in his life. With firm steps but a heavy heart, he decided to approach. As he got closer, the girl looked up, surprised to see someone standing in front of her. Her eyes met Fernando's, and for a brief moment, he felt an unexpected connection. There was a silent pain there, a plea for help that wasn't just material. "Hi, how are you?" Fernando asked, his voice soft and gentle, trying not to scare her. The girl didn't respond immediately, just lowered her head, embarrassed. Sensing her hesitation, Fernando crouched down to her level and pulled a banknote from his wallet. "What's your name?" he asked, offering her the money with a warm smile. "Maria, sir," the girl replied in almost a whisper, her small fingers carefully taking the note, as if she was so used to receiving so little that something larger seemed impossible. "And what are you doing here alone, Maria?" Fernando continued, now more concerned, his eyes scanning the cemetery around them, looking for an adult who might be with her. But there was no one. Maria hesitated, then with a sad sigh began to explain. She told him that her mother had recently passed away, and she came to the cemetery every day to feel close to her. Her father, unemployed and sick, could barely work, and Maria tried to help in any way she could, even by begging to buy food and medicine. Fernando felt a tightness in his chest as he listened. The simplicity with which the girl spoke of her hardships made it all the more painful. She didn't complain, didn't cry, just narrated her harsh reality with the resignation of someone who had to learn to fight too early. "And you don't have anyone else?" he asked, trying to grasp the full extent of what Maria was facing. "No, sir. Just me and my father. Sometimes we get help from the neighbors, but they don't have much either," said Maria, her eyes now fixed on the nearly empty tin can in her hands. Fernando's heart broke. He, a man surrounded by abundance, who had never known what it was like to be in need, was standing before a child facing hardships no one should endure, least of all someone so young. He remembered his father's words, always saying that the true value of a man wasn't in what he had, but in how much he could extend a hand to others. Fernando knew he couldn't simply hand over money and walk away. Something inside him told him there was more to this story, something he didn't fully understand yet, but would make him return. He looked at Maria with newfound determination and said, "I'm going to help you, Maria. Don't worry, everything will be all right." Those words, simple but full of intention, carried the silent promise that Fernando would do more than just temporarily ease the girl's suffering. The cry for help. Fernando looked at Maria, still absorbing everything she had just told him. The girl, so small and fragile, clutched her tin can with both hands, her gaze lowered, as if asking for help was too heavy a burden to bear. There was sadness in her voice but also an unexpected strength. It was as if life had taught her far too soon how to cope with loss and the harshness of the world. "My dad, he's very sick, sir," Maria began, her voice almost a whisper, as if saying it aloud would make it even more real. "He can't work, and since my mom—" Her voice faltered for a moment, and Fernando saw the gleam of tears starting to form in the girl's eyes. "Since she's gone, everything has been harder. We have almost nothing." Fernando felt a lump in his throat. He had heard many stories over the years in his career as a businessman, but nothing had touched him like this. There was something brutally real in the simplicity of how Maria narrated her challenges. She wasn't asking for luxury or anything beyond the basics. With a trembling voice, Maria explained that all she wanted was to help her father, to buy medicine and food, nothing more. "I try to get some money here, but sometimes it's not enough," Maria continued, rubbing her hands on the worn fabric of her skirt, as if trying to suppress the discomfort of revealing her reality to a stranger. Fernando crouched down in front of her, wanting Maria to feel that he was there, present, and willing to listen to every word. He couldn't imagine what it was like for a child her age to bear such responsibility, but what he knew was that he had to do something. "And you, Maria? Who takes care of you?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with concern. Maria shook her head, as if it didn't matter. She only wanted to talk about her father. Fernando then realized the extent of the sacrifice this girl made every day, placing her father's needs above her own. "I'm fine," she said, but Fernando didn't believe it. There was no way a child living in those conditions could be fine. He knew he couldn't change Maria's past, but perhaps he could alter the course of her present and future. Moved, Fernando reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sum of money that he knew would make an immediate difference. He extended the bills to Maria, but noticed that she hesitated to take them. Her eyes, which had been full of sadness, now showed a mix of surprise and gratitude, as if she couldn't believe that someone, especially a stranger, could be so generous. "This is for you and your father," Fernando said, holding Maria's small hand and placing the money into her palm. "I want you to use it for whatever is needed, food, medicine, whatever you need." Maria looked at the money, then at Fernando, and for a brief moment, he saw hope begin to shine in her eyes again. It wasn't just about giving her money. It was the gesture of showing someone cared, that she and her father were not completely alone in the world. "Thank you, sir. I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice still choked with emotion. Fernando smiled, but deep down he knew this was only the beginning. He felt that this small act of kindness would not be enough to solve the real issue. There was something deeper going on, a situation that required more than just a temporary donation. He knew he would need to come back, learn more about Maria and her father, and perhaps find a way to help them more permanently. "Don't worry, Maria. Things will get better," he promised, trying to convey a sense of security that even he wasn't sure he could guarantee. But deep down, Fernando had already made up his mind. This wouldn't be the last time he saw Maria. There was something about her story that touched him deeply, as if fate had led him to that cemetery on this day, not just to pay his respects to his father, but to meet this girl whose life was about to change dramatically. The revelation of the past. As Fernando handed the money to little Maria, something caught his eye. As she carefully placed the notes into a worn-out little bag, a small pendant hanging from her neck swung slightly in the sunlight. It was a simple trinket, but with an air of mystery. Something about that old piece made Fernando feel a chill down his spine, as if time had stopped for a brief moment. He had seen it before. He just couldn't remember where exactly. "Maria, may I see your necklace?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his eyes were fixed on the pendant. Maria hesitated for a moment, clutching the small charm with her hand, but her expression was one of pride mixed with longing. She gently let it go so Fernando could get a closer look. "My mother gave me this necklace," Maria said softly, as if she were remembering something precious. "She said it had been in our family for a long time. When she died, I promised I would never take it off." Fernando remained silent for a few seconds, examining the pendant more closely. The design, the details engraved on the piece. He was certain he had seen that same symbol before, but where? Then suddenly the memory came rushing back. His father. He remembered an old photo of his father as a young man, smiling beside a man and a woman. And around the neck of the man in the photo was the very same pendant that now hung around Maria's neck. "Where did your mother get this necklace?" Fernando asked, trying to stay calm, though his heart was already racing. The connection was impossible to ignore. Maria furrowed her brow, trying to recall the details her mother had shared before she passed. "My mother said it came from our family, from many generations ago. She didn't talk much about it. Just that it was very important to her and to my father. But I don't think he knows everything." Fernando felt a lump form in his throat. This was more than just a coincidence. He needed to know more. How could this pendant, which appeared in a photo from his own family's past, now be hanging around the neck of an unknown girl living in poverty? "And your father? Does he know anything about this necklace?" Fernando asked, his heart tightening. Maria shook her head slowly, looking a little confused. "I don't know. He's never talked much about it. Since my mother died, he's been even quieter. But I feel like this necklace is the only thing that still reminds him of her." Fernando stayed silent, thinking of all the possibilities. It was as if pieces of an ancient puzzle were starting to fit together, revealing something he had never expected to discover. His father had never mentioned anything about the necklace, or about possible connections with another family. Could there be a link between their families that he didn't know about? Were there secrets buried in the past that were about to be revealed? "Maria," he said, trying to sound calm despite the racing of his heart, "I need you to tell me more about your mother. Her name, where she lived. Anything you can remember." Maria looked at him, clearly surprised by the sudden interest. but there was something in Fernando's tone that made her trust him. Her name was Helena. Helena Costa. We lived in a simple house not far from here. I don't remember much more. I was little when she passed away. The name Helena Costa echoed in Fernando's mind. It was as if he had heard that name before, perhaps in old conversations with his father, in moments when he hadn't been paying attention. The feeling that fate had brought him to this place, to meet Maria on this day, was overwhelming. Fernando felt an urgency to know more, to uncover the mystery behind the pendant and the connection between their families. Something told him that by helping Maria, he wasn't just transforming her life. He was also solving a puzzle that his own father had never had the chance to solve. "Maria," he said, his voice firm, "I'm going to help you and your father, but I need to understand better what's happening. I have a feeling that this necklace might lead us to something much bigger than we imagine." And at that moment, Fernando knew this journey wasn't just about helping a girl in need. It was about uncovering a secret that connected the past of their families. A secret that was about to change both of their lives forever. Surprising discovery. Fernando couldn't get the amulet out of his mind. It was as if that small object carried more than just memories. It held secrets. After saying goodbye to Maria at the cemetery, he returned home with an unsettled mind. Questions haunted him. How could that necklace, a family symbol for him, have ended up around the neck of such a young and unknown girl? And the name Helena Costa. Why did it sound so familiar, so close? Determined to dig deeper, Fernando began a discreet investigation. First, he rummaged through old family albums, searching for any clues. And there it was, the photo he had in mind of his father, young and smiling next to a mysterious woman. He had never asked about that photo. At the time, it seemed like just another memory from the past, a keepsake stored away without much importance. But now it all made sense. Fernando noticed that, in that same photo, hanging around the woman's neck, was the amulet that Maria wore. It was unmistakable. His heart raced. Who was that woman? Why had his father never mentioned her? And more importantly, what was the connection between her and Maria's mother? That night was long, and Fernando barely slept. With each moment, more questions arose. The next day, he decided to seek the help of an old friend of his father's, a man named Antonio, who always seemed to know more than he revealed. Antonio was discreet, but Fernando knew he could help him unravel this mystery. When he found Antonio at a small cafe in town, Fernando showed him the old photo and asked directly, "Antonio, do you remember this woman next to my father?" Antonio stared at the photo for a long moment, as if reliving old memories. He took a deep breath and, after a pause, said something Fernando never expected to hear. "Fernando, I think it's time you knew. This woman was named Helena. She and your father had a very strong relationship years ago. They loved each other, but your father, he was already married and things got complicated." Fernando was paralyzed. His father, a man always so strict and moralistic, involved in a secret love affair? It was hard to believe, but Antonio's serious expression left no room for doubt. "They separated, not for lack of love, but because your father had other responsibilities. He chose to follow the path of family, but he never forgot her. The amulet that Helena wore was a gift from your father, something he gave her as a symbol of his love." Fernando fell silent for a moment, absorbing the information. Maria's mother, Helena, was the same woman from the photo. That same Helena who had kept a piece of his father's past. Now everything fit together. Maria was Helena's daughter, the woman his father had loved so deeply. And the amulet that Maria now wore was the key connecting these two stories. "But Antonio," Fernando murmured, still trying to comprehend the whole situation. "If my father loved Helena so much, how could he move on?" Antonio sighed, looking down, as if this was a story he wished he never had to tell. "Your father never truly moved on. He kept that secret for years. He always told me that the amulet was his way of keeping Helena close, even if they could never be together again." Antonio's words resonated deeply within Fernando. He understood that his father had lived with the weight of that secret love throughout his life. And now that love in some way had returned, manifesting in Maria's life, Helena's daughter. Fernando then realized that his connection with Maria went beyond mere charity. He was linked to her by an invisible thread, a bond that fate had woven long before he understood his own story. Determined to honor his father's memory and the love he could never fully live, Fernando made a decision in that moment. He would care for Maria, just as his father would have done for Helena, had fate allowed it. He couldn't change the past, but he could transform the future. And by doing so, he would not only be helping a young girl in need, but also unraveling an ancient mystery that deeply and unexpectedly united their families. The secret revealed. Fernando could hardly contain his restlessness as he headed to Maria's house. The path through the simple, humble streets felt increasingly surreal, as if he were stepping into a part of his own story he had never known. Upon arrival, he found a small, modest house, with walls worn by time and an air of simplicity that contrasted sharply with the life of luxury to which he was accustomed. That place seemed to hold deep memories, and Fernando felt a weight in his chest as he approached. Maria was waiting for him at the door, with the same sad look he had seen at the cemetery, but now mixed with a glimmer of hope. She invited him in, and Fernando noticed that despite the poverty, there was a warmth in that home, something that transcended the material. The gentle smell of coffee and the soft sound of a radio playing in the background created a cozy atmosphere, despite the visible hardships. Maria introduced Fernando to her father, Miguel, a thin man worn down by illness, but with eyes that still held a silent strength. He sat in a chair near the window, where the sunlight filtered weakly, illuminating his frail figure. Miguel smiled gently upon seeing Fernando, thanking him for all the help he had offered to his daughter. "You can't imagine how much your generosity means to us," Miguel said in a hoarse but sincere voice. Fernando sat beside him trying to find the right words. After a few moments of hesitation, he asked about Helena, Maria's mother, trying to understand more about the connection between her and his own father. Miguel took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if he were traveling back in time. "Helena was a strong woman," he began, his voice heavy with nostalgia. "When I met her, she was already fighting alone to raise Maria. She was always a warrior, but life wasn't easy for her." Fernando felt a knot forming in his throat. He knew that Helena's story held more than just pain, and he was about to discover something that would change everything. "She told me about a man," Miguel continued, looking directly at Fernando. "A man she loved deeply. A man who helped her when she needed it most, but who couldn't be with her because of his own life." He didn't know he had a daughter. Fernando's heart raced. He knew Miguel was speaking of his father, the man he had always admired, who had always seemed so untouchable, now revealed as someone carrying secrets and regrets. "She never wanted to tell the truth," Miguel explained, "not out of shame but because she knew he had a family, and she didn't want to complicate his life. Helena chose to raise Maria alone, with the dignity of someone who knows that certain battles are only theirs to fight." Fernando could hardly believe what he was hearing. His father had a daughter, a sister he never knew existed, and who was now sitting there beside him, completely unaware of the bond that united them. It all made sense now. The amulet, the memories, his father's silence about that part of his life. It was as if all the pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place, revealing a truth that had remained hidden for years. Miguel, already visibly tired, continued to speak with difficulty. "I know this is a lot for you, Fernando. I understand this story is painful to hear, but Helena wanted Maria to grow up knowing the truth. Unfortunately, fate took her before she could share the whole story." Fernando felt devastated, yet at the same time, a strong desire to protect Maria grew within him. He had discovered more than just family secrets. He had uncovered a new responsibility. His father's legacy was not merely financial, but also deeply human. There was a story of love, struggle, and sacrifice, and now he found himself in the midst of it. With a heavy heart, Fernando looked at Maria, who watched the conversation in silence, not fully grasping the implications of it all. "Maria," he said, his voice trembling, "there is so much more I need to tell you, but know this. You are not alone." He realized that from that moment on, his life would never be the same. He could not undo the past, but he could transform the future. In that instant, Fernando decided he would do everything possible to honor Helena's memory and the secret love of his father by caring for Maria as if she were his own daughter, the family that fate had unexpectedly given him. The secret was revealed, and with it, Fernando found not just answers, but also a new purpose. The impact of the discovery. Fernando left Maria's house in silence, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. What he had just uncovered was more than a simple family secret. It was a truth that spanned generations and suddenly challenged everything he thought he knew about his father. The simple streets he walked now felt like a labyrinth of memories and regrets, and in his mind, a torrent of emotions swirled, leaving him lost between guilt and the desire to do what was right. He remembered his father as a man of principles, someone who always taught him the importance of caring for family and being fair in all his actions. But now that image was shattered. Fernando questioned everything. How could his father hide something so significant? How had he never known about Maria's existence? He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of guilt, as if he too were somehow responsible for the absence in the girl's life. Fernando paused for a moment and gazed at the horizon. The memory of Maria's mother, a woman who struggled alone to raise her daughter without ever asking for anything in return, deeply moved him. He imagined how hard it must have been for her to face the world without his father's support, shouldering a secret that could have changed so many lives. He felt powerless for not having been able to help earlier, for not having noticed the signs. Now he understood that his life was intertwined with Maria's in ways he had never imagined. Sitting on a bench in a nearby park, Fernando ran his fingers through his hair, trying to organize his thoughts. The revelation that Maria was his half-sister altered everything he believed about his father's legacy. The man he so admired, who had always been a model of integrity and success, now appeared more human, with flaws and difficult choices. This did not erase the love Fernando felt for him, but it brought to light the harsh reality that everyone, even those we consider unshakable, carries their own scars and secrets. Fernando recalled all the times he had visited his father's grave, believing he knew his story completely. Each flower left, each prayer uttered, now felt like part of an incomplete ritual, as if a crucial piece was missing from the puzzle of his life. The image of Maria, with her sad eyes and simple clothes, haunted him. He could not ignore the fact that while he grew up surrounded by privileges, she struggled to survive, unaware that she had a brother who could help her. The pain in his heart was immense. He felt responsible for not having known Maria sooner, for not being the brother she deserved. Yet, at the same time, Fernando knew he could not change the past. However, he could transform the future. The guilt consuming him slowly shifted into a new purpose, to be for Maria what his father could not be. He decided right there on that lonely bench that he would do whatever it took to honor his father's memory, while also making amends for the past. When Fernando finally stood up, he felt that something inside him had changed. He was no longer the successful, self-assured businessman who had entered the cemetery just hours earlier. Now he was a man in search of redemption, a brother who needed to care for a family he never knew he had. Each step back to Maria's house felt lighter, as if by accepting the truth, he was beginning to free himself from the suffocating guilt. Upon arriving back at the house, he looked at Maria with a tenderness that hadn't existed before. The girl stared at him, not fully understanding the depth of what he had discovered but sensing, in some way, that something had changed. "Maria," Fernando said, his voice firm yet filled with emotion. "I promise you will never go through this alone again. Now you have me." The words left his mouth with a strength he didn't know he had. And in that moment, Fernando realized that his father's legacy was not just about success or wealth. It was about love, forgiveness, and the ability to face the most painful truths in order to create a better future. Fernando knew it wouldn't be easy, that the road ahead was fraught with challenges. But now he had a new purpose, and with Maria by his side he felt that somehow he was finally on the right path. A new beginning. Fernando spent the night awake, reflecting on the whirlwind of emotions he had experienced that day. The weight of discovering his half-sister Maria still lingered over him, but now there was a new clarity in his mind. He knew what he needed to do. It wasn't just about offering temporary help. He wanted to be a constant presence in Maria's life and her family's life, something his father, for reasons unknown, had never been able to be. The next morning, Fernando rose early, determined to start the day differently. As he looked in the mirror, he saw someone renewed. His priorities had completely changed. He no longer thought about business, meetings, or financial success goals. Now, his mind was focused on something much deeper: family. Even though part of this family had been hidden from him for so long, he felt this was his chance to redeem the past and build a different future. Resolved, Fernando went to Maria's house, bringing not just financial help, but also the promise of a lasting commitment. Upon arriving, he was met with the surprised gaze of the girl, who was still processing everything that had happened the day before. Maria's father, frail and worn, sat in a simple chair, yet his gaze held a certain dignity. Fernando, with a firm gesture, handed them an envelope, but this time he also knelt before Maria, looking directly into her eyes. "I want you to know, Maria, that I'm not here just because of the money. I want to be the brother you never had. I want you to know you can count on me always," he said, his voice laden with sincerity. Maria, still wary, gave a faint smile. It was a shy gesture but filled with hope. The connection between the two was starting to be built slowly but surely. However, Fernando knew there was still an important part of this journey that needed to be completed: telling the truth to his own family. The decision to reveal his father's secret wasn't easy, and he knew it would bring pain, confusion, and possibly even anger. But the truth, though difficult to express, was the only way for everyone to move forward. Days later, Fernando gathered his family in his home. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as no one knew what he had to say. His wife, his children, his siblings, everyone was there, anxiously awaiting the words that would change their lives. Fernando stood up slowly and began to speak. "I know what I'm about to tell you today may be hard to accept, but I need to be honest, just as our father always taught us to be." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I recently discovered that our father had a relationship in the past, before we were born. And from that relationship, a girl was born. Her name is Maria." The room fell into complete silence. Looks of surprise, shock, and even pain emerged. But Fernando continued. "Maria is our half-sister, and I met her recently. She is going through tough times, and I've committed to helping her. I know this may come as a shock to all of you, but I believe that our father, if he were here, would have done the same." His family's eyes filled with tears. The news was painful, but Fernando had chosen the path of transparency. After the initial shock, his wife was the first to approach, taking his hand with a look of understanding. "We will do whatever it takes," she said softly. From that moment on, Fernando felt he was finally honoring his father's memory in the right way, not by the image he projected to the world, but by the complex truth that had been revealed. He was not just building a bridge between two families that had long been kept apart. He was giving Maria what she had always deserved: a true family, a chance to be cared for and protected. In the following months, Fernando visited Maria regularly. They began to build a brotherly relationship, sharing conversations, laughter, and even memories, despite the circumstances. He also helped her family get back on their feet by offering financial support and assisting Maria's father in obtaining the medical treatment he needed. Over time, Fernando and Maria's story became an example of forgiveness and reconciliation. Both, in their own ways, found a new beginning. The past could not be changed, but they decided that the future would be built on honesty, love, and mutual support. Fernando now understood that his father's legacy was not just one of financial success or public recognition. It was the legacy of family, of connection between people, even when that connection was discovered late. He knew that by helping Maria, he was finally doing what was right, not just for her, but for himself as well. And so Fernando and Maria moved forward with their lives, united as siblings, honoring their parents' memory in the truest way, with love, understanding, and above all, a new beginning. This story shows us that life often holds secrets that can completely alter our trajectory. Fernando and Maria are a clear example that the past, no matter how painful, can teach us valuable lessons about forgiveness, unity, and the importance of not turning a blind eye to those in need. The discovery of a family bond, even if unexpected, brought the chance for a new beginning, reminding us that it is always time to reconnect, help, and transform someone's life. This journey teaches us about the power of truth and how, by facing our fears and revelations, we can find new opportunities to be better and care for those around us. Love and support for family, whether by blood or by heart, are pillars that can strengthen and give meaning to our journey. Now we want to know, How did this story touch you? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose the path of forgiveness or truth? Share your thoughts in the comments, as we would love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed this moving story and want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell to receive notifications and stay updated on all the stories we have to share. Together we can learn, reflect, and grow with each of them. Until the next video.